It was 2:30 in the morning on the 1st of July 1923 when the Egyptian aristocrat Ali Fahmy Bey fell to the floor of his room in London's Savoy hotel. He had been shot at point-blank range in the head, neck and back, and behind the Browning pistol stood Farmy's wife of just 7 months, the 32-year-old Marguerite Alibert. At her trial in September, Farmy was cast as Marguerite's tormentor, and as the memory of the dead man was utterly denounced and his ethnicity vilified, Marguerite's own past was kept a complete secret. The court couldn't risk any mention of Prince Edward, the heir to the British throne. According to the historian Andrew Rose, the authorities wanted Marguerite to be acquitted. A murder conviction would have been catastrophic for the crown. Here is the life of Marguerite Alibert, and this is Crown Undone. Marguerite Marie Alibert was born in Paris on the 9th of December 1890. Marguerite's mother worked as a housekeeper and her father worked as a coach driver, but in 1905 the family was hit by tragedy. While Marguerite was looking after her 4-year-old brother outside the family's home, he was struck and killed by a passing lorry. Utterly distraught, Marguerite's parents blamed their daughter for causing the accident, and at 15 Marguerite was sent away to a nearby Catholic boarding school. Marguerite was soon made to work as a domestic servant for the family of the Parisian lawyer Henri Jules Langlois, but when she fell pregnant the next year, Marguerite was expelled from the position and sent back home, where she gave birth to her daughter Raymonda at just 16. However, with no means to support her newborn daughter, Raymonda was sent to be raised by a family in the countryside. Marguerite spent the next decade of her life in near obscurity, possibly, according to historian Andrew Rose, getting by as a street prostitute. That was until she met the infamous brothel keeper Madame Denounced. Licensed brothels had been legal in France since 1804. By law, they had to be operated by a woman and the building's exterior had to be kept discreet. Only a lit red lantern at the brothel's entryway would hint that the establishment was open and ready for business. By 1810, there were 180 officially sanctioned brothels in Paris alone. In fact, one of Paris's most opulent and best-known brothels was regularly frequented by Britain's future King Edward VII, and one of the rooms in the brothel even carried Edward's coat of arms. The copper bathtub that Edward typically bathed in, filled with both courtesans and champagne, was bought by the Spanish artist Salvador Dali when the brothel was finally closed in 1946. Now under the guidance of Madame Denounced, Marguerite was primed for success among the brothel's aristocratic clientele. According to Madame Denounced, Marguerite soon became, quote, the mistress of nearly all my best clients, gentlemen of wealth and position in France, England, America, and other countries. It was me that made a sort of lady of her. And it wouldn't be long until the heir of the British throne took notice as well. Named after his late uncle, Prince Albert Victor, who had been known as Eddie throughout his life, Prince Edward was born on the 23rd of June 1894, during the last years of his great-grandmother Queen Victoria's reign. At 16, Edward was made the Prince of Wales after the death of his grandfather, Edward VII, and the ascension of his father, George V. At the outbreak of the First World War and 3 years into his tenure as the Prince of Wales, Edward was keen to enlist, joining the Grenadier Guards in June 1914. Although he insisted that he be able to serve on the front lines, Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War, forbade it, fearing the damage that could come from an enemy capture of the British heir. Edward had to settle for regular visits to the front lines instead, for which he was awarded the Military Cross in 1916. In April 1917, now an officer on leave in Paris, Edward arranged to meet the dazzling courtesan Marguerite Alibert. Marguerite had become separated from the wealthy businessman André Melle when she caught the attention of the English prince. The married and older Melle had been living openly with Marguerite before their near-constant arguments, and Melle's intense jealousy caused the relationship to crumble. Marguerite received 200,000 francs from Melle once their affair ended, but she later admitted to being furious at herself for agreeing to what she considered such a meagre sum. Marguerite and Edward were first introduced at a formal lunch with his aristocratic friends. Over the next 18 months, Edward and Marguerite would meet up whenever they could. They would drive around Paris in Edward's Rolls-Royce, drink champagne, and throughout their relationship, the Prince of Wales sent more than 20 letters to the French courtesan. These letters not only exposed Edward's romantic feelings for Marguerite, but also contained classified information about the progress of the war and pejorative remarks about the British monarchy, especially about his father, George V. It was a risky move to reveal such sensitive information, and a move that would haunt the British establishment for years to come, much to the benefit of Marguerite. It seemed like Edward naively believed that Marguerite would destroy the letters whenever he asked, and by the time Edward set his sights on a new English lover, Marguerite assured the prince that she would do what she liked with his damning letters. Edward wrote to his advisor in November 1918, quote, "Oh, those bloody letters, and what a fool I was not to take your advice over a year ago. I'm afraid she's the £100,000 or nothing type, though I'm disappointed and didn't think she'd turn nasty. Of the whole trouble is my letters, and she's not burnt one." To Marguerite, the priceless letters symbolised immunity, a kind of protection that she would draw on years later to save her reputation and her freedom. Once her affair with the prince ended, Marguerite quickly married the wealthy young Air Force officer Charles Laurent. However, and possibly by design, the marriage was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Thanks to a massive divorce settlement, Marguerite had amassed a fortune. At just 30, she could now afford housekeepers, 10 horses, 2 limousines, and an apartment on the fashionable Avenue Henri Martin. It's also said that around that time, Marguerite paid for her daughter Raymonda to attend one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country. Still working as an escort, Marguerite spent a business trip across the Mediterranean with an Egyptian businessman when she was spotted by the young aristocrat Ali Fahmy Bey. Farmy was well known amongst the Parisian elite and received an annual income of £40,000, something like £2 million today. His family had earned their fortune from the Egyptian cotton trade, and by 1922, Farmy became Marguerite's next target. Like Prince Edward, Farmy asked a friend to introduce him to the French courtesan, and despite Marguerite's complete lack of royal blood, Farmy was intent on marriage, defying the expectations of his family. The couple were married in an Islamic ceremony in January 1923, but it soon became clear that the fairly strict and conservative expectations that Farmy had for his wife would be at complete odds with Marguerite's independent and headstrong nature, and for Farmy, this proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Farmy and Marguerite were arguing almost constantly. On the 1st of July 1923, 7 months into their chaotic marriage, Farmy and Marguerite were having another furious row. They had just returned to the Savoy Hotel after watching The Merry Widow, an astonishingly popular operetta which ran for 778 performances in London alone. Soon, the operetta's name would seem almost prophetic. When Farmy turned to face the hotel window, Marguerite pulled out her pistol and shot her husband 3 times at point-blank range. Farmy was immediately taken to a nearby hospital, but he died an hour afterwards. 2 months later, Marguerite was on trial for murder, but she played her trump card. According to Andrew Rose, she threatened to release the letters that Prince Edward had written to her if she were not protected. By the early 1920s, Prince Edward had become the archetypal new royal. During a visit to the US, the magazine Menswear wrote that, quote, "The average young man in America is more interested in the clothes of the Prince of Wales than in any other individual on earth." The British establishment knew that it was crucial for Edward's name to be kept out of the trial at all costs. London's Old Bailey was packed on the 10th of September 1923. Although Marguerite was on trial for murder, in that courtroom she was the victim. Defended by the notorious English barrister Sir Edward Marshall Hall, Marguerite was said to have been tormented by a violent, controlling and sexually depraved husband, and that shooting Farmy was purely an act of justifiable self-defense. The defense said Farmy had locked Marguerite in his yacht, and on one occasion he had dislocated her jaw. When Marguerite, who only spoke French, took to the stand the next day, the jury could only hear her English testimony via a translator. In his concluding statement, Marshal Hall told the jury, quote, "Eastern men, as I have said, are courteous and elegant, but underneath lies an Eastern temperament. Members of the jury, I want you to open the gates, where the Western woman can go out, not into the dark night of the desert, but back to her friends who love her in spite of her weaknesses. You will open the gate and let this Western woman go back into the light of God's great Western sun." Marshal Hall was directly playing on the tropes of the wildly popular and overtly racist romance novels of the time. The desert romance generally followed a beautiful and European damsel in distress as she falls passionately in love with a not European man. And for Marshal Hall, the strategy worked exactly as he had hoped. On the 15th of September 1923, the jury took just a little over an hour to find Marguerite not guilty, and she was acquitted of all charges. Even after the trial, Marguerite attempted to sue Farmy's family, having claimed that she was now pregnant. Although her claim was eventually dismissed, Marguerite was still a wildly wealthy woman in her own right. She lived in a Parisian apartment that overlooked the Ritz for the rest of her life, and she died in January 1971 at 80 years old. Although the Prince of Wales's name was successfully kept out of the trial, he was soon involved in another secret relationship that would lead to constitutional crisis. When the now King Edward VIII decided to marry the two-time divorcee and American socialite Wallis Simpson, he also decided to abdicate the British throne. Edward's father, George V, had presciently said of his son in 1935, quote, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months. I pray to God my eldest son will never marry and have children, and that nothing will come between Bertie and Lilibet and the throne." That was the life of Marguerite Alibert, and this was Crown Undone.